Chapter 11. A Knife in the Dark. As they prepared for sleep in the inn at Bree, darkness lay on Buckland. A mist strayed in the dells and along the river bank. The house at Crickhollow stood silent. Fatty Bulger opened the door cautiously and peered out. A feeling of fear had been growing on him all day, and he was unable to rest or go to bed. There was a brooding threat in the breathless night air. As he stared out into the gloom, a black shadow moved under the trees. The gate seemed to open of its own accord and close again without a sound. Terror seized him. He shrank back, and for a moment he stood trembling in the hall. Then he shut and locked the door. The night deepened. There came the soft sound of horses led with stealth along the lane. Outside the gate they stopped, and 3 black figures entered, like shades of night creeping across the ground. One went to the door, one went to the corner of the house on either side, and there they stood, as still as the shadows of stones, while night went slowly on. The house and the quiet trees seemed to be waiting breathlessly. There was a faint stir in the leaves, and a cock crowed far away. The cold hour before dawn was passing. The figure by the door moved. In the dark without moon or stars, a drawn blade gleamed, as if a chill light had been unsheathed. There was a blow, soft but heavy, and the door shuddered. "Open, in the name of Mordor," said a voice thin and menacing. At a second blow the door yielded and fell back, with timbers burst and lock broken. The black figures passed swiftly in. At that moment, among the trees nearby, a horn rang out. It rent the night like fire on a hilltop. "Awake! Fire! Fear! Foes! Awake!" Fatty Bulger had not been idle. As soon as he saw the dark shapes creep up from the garden, he knew that he must run for it or perish. And run he did, out of the back door, through the garden, and over the fields. When he reached the nearest house, more than a mile away, he collapsed on the doorstep. "No, no, no!" he was crying. "No, not me! I haven't got it!" It was some time before anyone could make out what he was babbling about. At last they got the idea that enemies were in Buckland, some strange invasion from the old forest. And then they lost no more time. "Fear! Fire! Foes!" The brandy-bucks were blowing the horn call of Buckland that had not been sounded for 100 years, not since the white wolves came in the fell winter when the brandy wine was frozen over. "Awake! Awake!" Far away answering horns were heard. The alarm was spreading. The black figures fled from the house. One of them let fall a hobbit cloak on the step as he ran. In the lane the noise of hoofs broke out, and gathering to a gallop, went hammering away into the darkness. All about Crickhollow there was the sound of horns blowing, and voices crying and feet running. But the black riders rode like a gale to the north gate. Let the little people blow. Sauron would deal with them later. Meanwhile they had another errand. They knew now that the house was empty and the ring had gone. They rode down the guards at the gate and vanished from the Shire. In the early night Frodo woke from deep sleep suddenly, as if some sound or presence had disturbed him. He saw that Strider was sitting alert in his chair. His eyes gleamed in the light of the fire, which had been tended and was burning brightly, but he made no sign of movement. Frodo soon went to sleep again, but his dreams were again troubled with the noise of wind and of galloping hoofs. The wind seemed to be curling round the house and shaking it, and far off he heard a horn blowing wildly. He opened his eyes and heard a cock crowing lustily in the inn-yard. Strider had drawn the curtains and pushed back the shutters with a clang. The first grey light of day was in the room, and the cold air was coming through the open window. As soon as Strider had roused them all, he led the way to their bedrooms. When they saw them, they were glad they had taken his advice. The windows had been forced open and were swinging, and the curtains were flapping. The beds were tossed about, and the bolsters slashed and flung upon the floor. The brown mat was torn to pieces. Strider immediately went to fetch the landlord. Poor Mr. Butterbur looked sleepy and frightened. He had hardly closed his eyes all night, so he said, but he had never heard a sound. "Never has such a thing happened in my time," he cried, raising his hands in horror. "Guests unable to sleep in their beds, and good bolsters ruined and all. What are we coming to?" "Dark times," said Strider. "But for the present you may be left in peace when you have got rid of us. We will leave at once. Never mind about breakfast. A drink and a bite standing will have to do. We shall be packed in a few minutes." Mr. Butterbur hurried off to see that their ponies were got ready, and to fetch them a bite. But very soon he came back in dismay. The ponies had vanished. The stable doors had all been opened in the night, and they were gone. Not only Mary's ponies, but every other horse and beast in the place. Frodo was crushed by the news. How could they hope to reach Rivendell on foot, pursued by mounted enemies? They might as well set out for the moon. Strider sat silent for a while, looking at the hobbits, as if he was weighing up their strength and courage. "Ponies would not help us to escape horsemen," he said at last, thoughtfully, as if he had guessed what Frodo had in mind. "We should not go much slower on foot, not on the roads that I mean to take. I was going to walk in any case. It is the food and stores that trouble me. We cannot count on getting anything to eat between here and Rivendell, except what we take with us, and we ought to take plenty to spare, for we may be delayed or forced to go roundabout, far out of the direct way. How much are you prepared to carry on your backs?" "As much as we must," said Pippin with a sinking heart, but trying to show that he was tougher than he looked, or felt. "I can carry enough for 2, said Sam defiantly. "Can't anything be done, Mr. Butterbur?" asked Frodo. "Can't we get a couple of ponies in the village, or even one just for the baggage? I don't suppose we could hire them, but we might be able to buy them," he added doubtfully, wondering if he could afford it. "I doubt it," said the landlord unhappily. "The 2 or 3 riding ponies that were in Bree were stabled in my yard, and they're gone. As for other animals, horses or ponies for draft or what not, there are very few of them in Bree, and they won't be for sale. But I'll do what I can. I'll rout out Bob and send him round as soon as may be." "Yes," said Strider reluctantly, "you had better do that. I am afraid we shall have to try to get 1 pony at least. But so ends all hope of starting early and slipping away quietly. We might as well have blown a horn to announce our departure. That was part of their plan, no doubt." "There is 1 crumb of comfort," said Mary, "and more than a crumb, I hope. We can have breakfast while we wait, and sit down to it. Let's get hold of Nob." In the end there was more than 3 hours' delay. Bob came back with the report that no horse or pony was to be got for love or money in the neighborhood, except one. Bill Ferny had one that he might possibly sell. "A poor old half-starved creature it is," said Bob, "but he won't part with it for less than thrice its worth, seeing how you're placed to not if I knows Bill Ferny." "Bill Ferny?" said Frodo. "Isn't there some trick? Wouldn't the beast bolt back to him with all our stuff, or help in tracking us or something?" "I wonder," said Strider, "but I cannot imagine any animal running home to him once it got away. I fancy this is only an afterthought of kind Master Ferny's, just a way of increasing his profits from the affair. The chief danger is that the poor beast is probably at death's door, but there does not seem any choice. What does he want for it?" Bill Ferny's price was 12 silver pennies, and that was indeed at least 3 times the pony's value in those parts. It proved to be a bony, underfed, and dispirited animal, but it did not look like dying just yet. Mr. Butterbur paid for it himself, and offered Mary another 18 pence as some compensation for the lost animals. He was an honest man and well off as things were reckoned in Bree, but 30 silver pennies was a sore blow to him, and being cheated by Bill Ferny made it harder to bear. As a matter of fact, he came out on the right side in the end. It turned out later that only 1 horse had actually been stolen. The others had been driven off or had bolted in terror, and were found wandering in different corners of the Breeland. Mary's ponies had escaped altogether, and eventually, having a good deal of sense, they made their way to the downs in search of Fatty Lumpkin. So they came under the care of Tom Bombadil for a while, and were well off. But when news of the events at Bree came to Tom's ears, he sent them to Mr. Butterbur, who thus got 5 good beasts at a very fair price. They had to work harder in Bree, but Bob treated them well, so on the whole they were lucky. They missed a dark and dangerous journey, but they never came to Rivendell. However, in the meanwhile, for all Mr. Butterbur knew, his money was gone for good or for bad, and he had other troubles. There was a great commotion as soon as the remaining guests were astir and heard news of the raid on the inn. The southern travelers had lost several horses and blamed the innkeeper loudly, until it became known that one of their own number had also disappeared in the night, none other than Bill Ferny's squint-eyed companion. Suspicion fell on him at once. "If you pick up with the horse thief and bring him to my house," said Butterbur angrily, "you ought to pay for all the damage yourselves and not come shouting at me. Go and ask Ferny where your handsome friend is." It appeared that he was nobody's friend, and nobody could recollect when he had joined their party. After their breakfast, the hobbits had to repack, and get together further supplies for the longer journey they were now expecting. It was close on 10 o'clock before they at last got off. By that time the whole of Bree was buzzing with excitement. Frodo's vanishing trick, the appearance of the Black Horseman, the robbing of the stables, and not least the news that Strider the Ranger had joined the mysterious hobbits, made such a tale as would last for many uneventful years. Most of the inhabitants of Bree and Staddle, and many even from Combe and Archay, were crowded in the road to see the travellers start. The other guests in the inn were at the doors or hanging out of the windows. Strider had changed his mind, and he decided to leave Bree by the main road. Any attempt to set off across country at once would only make matters worse. Half the inhabitants would follow them to see what they were up to, and to prevent them from trespassing. They said farewell to Nob and Bob, and took leave of Mr. Butterbur with many thanks. "I hope we shall meet again some day, when things are merry once more," said Frodo. "I should like nothing better than to stay in your house in peace for a while." They tramped off, anxious and downhearted, under the eyes of the crowd. Not all the faces were friendly, nor all the words that were shouted, but Strider seemed to be held in awe by most of the Breelanders, and those that he stared at shut their mouths and drew away. He walked in front with Frodo. Next came Merry and Pippin, and last came Sam leading the pony. which was laden with as much of their baggage as they had the heart to give it. But already it looked less dejected, as if it approved of the change in its fortunes. Sam was chewing an apple thoughtfully. He had a pocket full of them, a parting present from Nob and Bob. "Apples for walking, and a pipe for sitting," he said, "but I reckon I'll miss them both before long." The hobbits took no notice of the inquisitive heads that peeped out of doors, or popped over walls and fences as they passed. But as they drew near to the further gate, Frodo saw a dark, ill-kept house behind a thick hedge, the last house in the village. In one of the windows he caught a glimpse of a sallow face with sly, slanting eyes, but it vanished at once. "So that's where that southerner is hiding," he thought. "He looks more than half like a goblin." Over the hedge another man was staring boldly. He had heavy black brows and dark, scornful eyes. His large mouth curled in a sneer. He was smoking a short black pipe. As they approached, he took it out of his mouth and spat. "Morning, Longshanks," he said. "Off early. Found some friends at last." Strider nodded, but did not answer. "Morning, my little friends," he said to the others. "I suppose you know who we've taken up with. That's Stick-it-not Strider, that is. Though I've heard other names not so pretty. Watch out tonight. And you, Sammy, don't go ill-treating my poor old pony. Pah!" He spat again. Sam turned quickly. "And you, Fernie," he said, "put your ugly face out of sight, or it will get hurt." With a sudden flick, quick as lightning, an apple left his hand and hit Bill square on the nose. He ducked too late, and curses came from behind the hedge. "Waste of a good apple," said Sam regretfully, and strode on. At last they left the village behind. The escort of children and strangers that had followed them got tired and turned back at the south gate. Passing through, they kept out along the road for some miles. It bent to the left, curving back into its eastward line as it rounded the feet of Bree Hill, and then it began to run swiftly downwards into wooded country. To their left they could see some of the houses and hobbit holes of Staddle on the gentler southeastern slopes of the hill. Down in a deep hollow away north of the road there were wisps of rising smoke that showed where Combe lay. Arshay was hidden in the trees beyond. After the road had run down some way and had left Bree Hill standing tall and brown behind, they came on a narrow track that led off towards the north. "This is where we leave the open and take to cover," said Strider. "Not a short-cut, I hope," said Pippin. "Our last short-cut through woods nearly ended in disaster." "Ah, but you had not got me with you then," laughed Strider. "My cuts, short or long, don't go wrong." He took a look up and down the road. No one was in sight, and he led the way as quickly as he could down towards the wooded valley. His plan, as far as they could understand it without knowing the country, was to go eastward toward Arshay at first, but to bear right and pass it on the east, and then to steer as straight as he could over the wild lands to Weathertop Hill. In that way they would, if all went well, cut off a great loop of the road, which further on bent southwards to avoid the Midgewater marshes. But, of course, they would have to pass through the marshes themselves, and Strider's description of them was not encouraging. However, in the meanwhile, walking was not unpleasant. Indeed, if it had not been for the disturbing events of the night before, they would have enjoyed this part of the journey better than any up to that time. The sun was shining, clear but not too hot. The woods in the valley were still leafy and full of color, and seemed peaceful and wholesome. Strider guided them confidently among the many crossing paths. Although left them to themselves, they would soon have been at a loss. He was taking a wandering course with many turns and doublings, to put off any pursuit. "Bill Fernie will have watched where we left the road for certain," he said, "though I don't think he will follow us himself. He knows the land round here well enough, but he knows he is not a match for me in a wood. It is what he may tell others that I am afraid of. I don't suppose they are far away. If they think we have made for Arshay, so much the better."